This box might contain the future of footwear. The sneakers in this box weren't made in a factory. They have no animal products on them, no leather or suede. There's not even mesh on this shoe. In fact, this shoe wasn't even made by hands. It was printed. This is the Kith collaboration on the Adidas Climacool. Before we talk about what this shoe means for the future of sneakers, let's take a look at all the amazing details on this beautiful shoe. Is this even a shoe? Is this a slipper, a sneaker? What do we call this? Starting with the shoe box, we have a standard black bar logo Adidas shoe box. As we can see from the style label here, this is the Adidas Climacool. Very interesting that this is called the Climacool. I'll put a picture here of what the previous version of the Adidas Climacool looked like, which was also a heavily ventilated sneaker. That of course was more mesh and knit based, so I guess this is Adidas saying that we're going to achieve maximum ventilation with 3D shoes now, keeping the same name though as the Climacool. Opening the box is where we start to see some special stuff. We have a Mylar bag containing our shoes. As you can see on the bag, we have the Adidas 3-bar logo along with Kith branding. Inside the bag, there's no special goodies or anything, just the wonderful shoes themselves. Let's take a look. The first thing that my eyes are drawn to on this are the stripes of the sneaker, because as you can see all the way around, there's perforations through the 3D material, but the stripes themselves are solid. There's no perforations in them at all. I'm sure that was a design choice there to make the stripes appear more prominent on the sneaker instead of having the open perforated holes going through them. Maybe it would have been more difficult to see the stripes. I really like Kith's choice to have each stripe in a different color palette. I think it stands out a lot. Really dig that look. Now looking at the 3D printed material itself, this component I believe is called EPU41. At least that's just what a quick Google search tells me. It's possible that they've changed that component since then. But as we look above the midfoot, we can see that this material is very loose, very soft, very stretchable there over the midfoot. As you look towards the toe box, you see a little change in the design of the printing. Right about here, we change directions, and even towards the lateral side of the toe, that 3D material gets packed a little bit tighter for more stability and support. You can even see that they don't come apart there. There's no openings or perforations there at all. As you start to go towards the back of the sneaker, you see that material does get tighter towards the heel for support again. And if you look a little closely into this area, you see that there's extra little support structures of 3D material printed into the heel for support. Going down to the midsole, we get a new pattern on 3D shoes. We had a very prominent structure, lattice structure on previous 3D models. This appears to be much more linear and straight, not as many, protrusions as there were on the previous models. Again, much more tight there on the midsole than the rest of the foot. These do not separate as easily on the midfoot, and you might be able to see in there's a lot more structural support behind that outer layer of 3D material. We can again see the extra support on the heel, and you can start to see some of that outsole poking out there as well. Speaking of the outsole, there is no traditional rubber outsole like there's been on previous 3D models. Adidas likes to put their Continental rubber on the bottom of their shoes. This, again, is just entirely 3D printed. So no rubber outsole, just more of that EPU41 material. Obviously, you can see there's areas where they chose not to put perforations. I think these are just where the foot naturally puts more pressure on the ground while they're walking. But it's interesting to know that there are open perforations on the bottom of the shoe. Be very interested to see if debris gets through there over time and over a lot of wears of the sneaker. I am leaving on a vacation in a few weeks, and I plan to bring these with me. If you're interested in seeing a follow-up video with the durability of the shoe and how things go with dirt getting through these perforations, if you want to see that, let me know in the comments down below. Another thing I noticed with the midsole is kind of with the top-down view, we see a little bit of a protrusion on the lateral side of the sneaker, a little bit on the medial side as well. That reminds me a lot of the midsole of the Alpha Bounce Beyond that came out sometime in the 2010s, maybe late 2010s. Very similar style. Man, I still can't believe that I'm holding this in my hand, an entirely 3D printed shoe. I mean, look at this. It just bounces back to normal. We don't have to worry about creasing the toe box or anything. This is wild. But you know what? Despite how crazy this is and how far we've come with the technology, this doesn't really matter. People aren't really gonna wear this unless it is comfortable. So let me throw this on feet, show you what it looks like, tell you about the sizing and the comfort. So as far as sizing goes, this shoe was only made in half sizes, meaning they only had like 9.5, 10.5, 11.5. They didn't have 9s, 10s, 11s, or 12s, but at least here in America, right? It's UK 10, UK 11, UK 12, and so on, right? I am traditionally a size 13, so I had to choose between going down a half size or up a half size. I watched a review on the 2014 release by Nature Boy Chuck, and he suggested going up half a size, so I did so, and I'm happy to say that was the right choice because these fit great. I say it fits great, but it was actually a battle to get my foot into this shoe without my socks just completely riding up and making my foot feel uncomfortable. This material is not very forgiving to the cotton of your socks. The cotton just will catch onto the material and it won't like slide with it. There's a lot of friction as you're trying to put your foot in there, and so it just causes the sock to just choke up on your toes as you get in. So I'll try to show you here. I had to like try to rig my sock and have it like half off of my foot as I put it into the shoe in order for it to be comfortable once my foot was all the way in there. So the question I'm sure you've been waiting to have answered in this video, are these things comfortable? And the answer is yes, they are extremely comfortable. Now, they're not the most comfortable thing I've ever put on my feet. These certainly don't compare to the comfort of like a Morfoam New Balance or an Ultra Boost 1.0. I still think that's the most comfortable shoe ever, but this is very comfortable. It's certainly more comfortable than a lot of today's tech runners. It's more comfortable than a New Balance 2002R, an Adidas Adistar cushion, a Saucony Pro Grid 9. This is very impressive. 3D printing started becoming popular in the 2010s, and the sneaker industry took notice. Nike and Adidas partnered with some major 3D printing companies. Adidas would partner with the company Carbon in 2016. And after just 1 year, they would release their first sneaker with a 3D printed midsole. Now, by all accounts, that shoe was not comfortable. Maybe the knitting on top was comfortable, but the 3D material itself was reported as being very stiff. Adidas would follow that up in 2019 with the release of Alpha Edge 4Ds and ZX 4000 4D sneakers, which both featured 3D printed midsoles, this time in a lime green type of color. Now, at the time, 3D printing was not a cost-effective thing. These shoes were very expensive. I want to say the 4000 4Ds were almost $500 retail. I was lucky enough to get this pair of 4Ds on sale, and it was one of my favorite shoes when I had it, but still pretty stiff material there on the midsole. It wouldn't be until late 2019 that Adidas released this Alpha Edge 2 sneaker with a 3D printed midsole. You can see this time they have a much lighter color on that 3D printed material, very much like the color that we see on today's Climacool. Now, I'm not sure if that material was softer than previous versions or if there was just maybe a change of insole, but that sneaker felt much more comfortable to me than the earlier release of the ZX 4000 4Ds. In 2020, Adidas would switch up the print style of that midsole. They would create a little bit shorter and a different shaped midsole on the Adidas Ultra 4Ds, which took an Ultra Boost 1.0 upper and put it on their new 3D printed midsole. Now that sneaker for sure had a lighter and softer component with a 3D printing. They were much more comfortable than previous iterations. In 2021, Adidas would release the 4D Forward, which was designed to be a running shoe. We can see the change in the lattice structure on this sneaker was designed to squish in a way that would propel forward as the foot released from the ground. I did get a pair of these. I didn't find that squish to feel very stable under my foot, and since I wasn't running in those shoes, it wasn't a shoe that I wanted to keep, but it was definitely softer than previous versions. Since 2021, Adidas has been putting that 3D printed midsole on a variety of different models. They would eventually release in late 2024 the first ever fully 3D printed sneaker by a major sneaker brand. That was a very limited release in 2024. I tried very hard to get that shoe, but unfortunately they did not make it in my size, and the resale prices were ridiculous anyway. Fast forward to May of 2021, Adidas would have a much wider release of the sneaker, including a larger size run of the shoe. Unfortunately, I struck out on that release again, but I was fortunate enough to pick up this pair of the Kith collaboration on the secondary market for a decent price. So 9 years of experimenting with 3D printing, and we finally arrived at a fully 3D printed shoe by Adidas. So now that we've talked about this specific sneaker, what does the design of a 3D printed shoe mean about the future of sneakers? Well, I think that there are 3 things to consider here for the future of sneakers. One, I think the obvious thing for us is customization. I can see a future where from our phones, from our laptops, we could pick the color of our 3D printed material, the color of our stripes or our checks if it's on Nikes. We can have designs printed onto the sneaker, and we can fully customize it. Not just the design, but the fit to our shoe as well. I could see us going into a store, having a scan of our shoe made, and having a model printed specifically for our foot. Even preferences with softness and the cushion that we want underfoot. I'm sure we can get to a point. Where all that is attainable. The second thing I think to consider is for the brands. I think the process of making a 3D printed shoe will eventually become much more efficient than hand making shoes or producing shoes in a factory. All right, I think from inception to final product, the design of making a shoe has got to be easier with the use of a 3D printer as opposed to planning with hands, making lasts of shoes, creating different swatches of material to go on the sneaker. It's got to be more efficient with a design process for a 3D printed sneaker. The last thing to consider here is the impact that this will have on the ethical practices of the fashion industry. Big companies like Adidas and Nike have come under fire over the last few decades of the workplace conditions of the factories that they have overseas. And while a change to this might lose those jobs that some people are relying on, and I'm not sure how that weighs out in the end, this will certainly reduce waste over time. Specifically the way that Adidas and Carbon are 3D printing their shoes. They use digital light synthesis, so they have a liquid base of material and they're using light and oxygen to create the design on here. And so as this prints, it's literally rising out of the liquid, and any waste then drops back into the liquid. I Googled a little bit more about the environmental impact of 3D printing sneakers, and Google says that carbon emissions from shoe manufacturing could drop by up to 50%, and the usage of water could drop by as much as 99% from 3D printing shoes. So does this mean that we're going to have 3D printed shoes everywhere in the future? I don't know about that. I think there's always going to be a demand for leather dress shoes, for things like work boots, but I could absolutely see this being the future of performance footwear. I can definitely see big brands using 3D printing to target the markets of running and team sports. The Kith collaboration on the Adidas Climacool is in contention for Sneaker of the Year for me in 2025. If you haven't seen this video where I talk about another contender, you should check it out because that is a phenomenal shoe. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in another video. God bless.